All right, John A.G. here, and I need you to lock in for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to lay out isn't some maybe scenario or an internet conspiracy thread. It's a repeating mechanism already moving underneath your feet. 127 million Americans are on a track where they could watch their savings, their retirement plans, and their safe money get chewed up in slow motion, until one day it stops being slow. And if that sounds dramatic, here's a simple way to picture it. Imagine you did everything responsible. You built an emergency fund, you avoided crazy risks, you put money into retirement, you trusted that $1 today would behave like $1 tomorrow. Now imagine the number in your account stays the same, but the world around it reprices. Rent climbs, food climbs, insurance climbs, interest costs climb, taxes creep up in sneaky ways, and your safe money can't keep up because the system quietly forces you to accept returns below the real inflation rate. That hidden squeeze has a name in economic history: financial repression. And it's one of the most common tools used in stage 3 because it's politically smoother than saying, we can't pay what we promised. It's the slow boil version of collapse. And the reason I'm speaking urgently is because slow boils eventually hit a tipping point where the lid blows off. And here's the part that makes this so dangerous. Most people won't recognize what's happening until it's already too late to move. Right now, the federal government's debt load is being discussed in numbers so large they don't even feel real. Tens of trillions, with interest costs climbing, budgets stretched, and political incentives that basically guarantee the same decision gets made again and again. But the story isn't just America has debt. The story is that debt, currency, and confidence form a loop. And when that loop breaks, it doesn't break politely. So, in this video, I'm going to walk you through the same 4-stage collapse pattern that has shown up across empires, republics, and modern nation-states, over and over, without caring what flag was on the buildings or what technology people had in their pockets. Then we're going to run 3 historical examples through that framework: Rome, Weimar Germany, and Venezuela. Because once you see it in those cases, you're going to recognize the fingerprints everywhere. And finally, I'm going to connect that pattern to the United States today, explain why millions of households are uniquely exposed, and what kinds of moves historically separate the people who lose everything from the people who end up owning the pieces after the dust settles. But before we get into it, quick favor. My channel analytics show something that honestly drives me a little crazy. A huge chunk of the people watching these videos aren't subscribed. You're here, you're watching, you're getting value, and then you vanish like a ghost. So if you get even a little value out of this kind of breakdown, hit subscribe right now, seriously. We're pushing hard for 50,000 subscribers in the next 30 days, and if you're part of the audience, you might as well be part of the community. Also, we're now posting members-exclusive videos on a regular basis, and this isn't recycled content. A dedicated team is working behind the scenes to build these deep dive updates only for you, our special members, and the John A.G. family. If you want in, click the join button right now, or use the link in the description. And one more thing, if you're someone who's doing well, if you've built something, flipped something, invested wisely, or turned your situation around, share your success in the comments. It helps other people realize it's still possible to win, even when things feel shaky. All right, now let's jump in. Because another week, another everything is fine headline, while the math quietly gets worse. And the math is the part that doesn't care about opinions. Here's the mechanism. Every major currency and debt collapse tends to follow a 4-stage rhythm. Not because someone planned it that way, but because incentives push governments in the same direction, and human behavior responds the same way when trust starts cracking. Stage 1 is the foundation. A nation builds a currency system that people actually trust. The rules feel stable, contracts matter, commerce expands, savings feel safe. People plan decades ahead because they believe the unit they're saving in will still mean something later. This stage can last a long time, which is exactly why it hypnotizes everyone. The longer it lasts, the more permanent it feels. Stage 2 is expansion and debasement. Something changes. War, recession, political promises, corruption, demographics, whatever. The government needs more money than it can realistically collect through taxes without triggering revolt. So it takes the easier road. It borrows. It prints. It changes the rules. At first, it doesn't look like a crisis. It can even look like prosperity. Credit becomes cheap, asset prices rise, stock markets feel unstoppable, real estate feels like it only goes one direction. And people confuse that paper wealth with real wealth. Stage 3 is loss of control. And this is where the headlines can be the most misleading, because stage 2 often looks like success. People see their house price up 30% and think they got richer, even if their paycheck didn't move. People see the market hit new highs and think the economy is healthy, even if the average family is using credit cards to bridge groceries. And governments love this phase, because as long as asset prices are inflating, it feels like everyone is winning. But underneath it, the currency unit is weakening, and that weakness eventually shows up in the cost of real life. So if you've ever wondered why the official narrative feels disconnected from your day-to-day, stage 2 is often the answer. This is where the numbers stop working. Not hard to pay, not politically painful, but mathematically unpayable. Servicing the debt becomes the budget. Raising rates breaks the system. Lowering rates fuels inflation. So policy becomes a treadmill. The government tries patches, price controls, special programs, new rules, propaganda, blaming outsiders, changing the statistics. You'll also see a quieter version of control, rules that steer money where the state needs it. Banks get encouraged to hold government paper. Pension funds get nudged into the same. Regulations change so that what counts as safe conveniently supports the government's financing. And the public is told it's all for stability. That's not a conspiracy. It's a historical pattern of how governments keep borrowing when normal buyers start demanding too much yield. Meanwhile, people with real information start moving. They rotate out of paper promises and into things that can't be printed. Gold, silver, land, productive businesses, foreign assets, anything that holds value outside the system's promises. Stage 4 is the end game. Either you get a currency crisis where prices run away, or you get a credit crisis where the system defaults, freezes, and implodes. Sometimes it's a mix. But either way, the middle class, the people who did everything right, saved carefully, trusted institutions, tends to get hit the hardest. And then, after the wreckage, a new order shows up. A new currency, new rules, new winners. And a very familiar sentence gets spoken by the survivors. I can't believe that happened. Now, I'm not asking you to take this on faith. Let's run the pattern. First stop, Rome. At its height, Rome didn't just have an army, it had credibility. Its money traveled. Its coins were accepted across continents because people believed the metal content was real and the state's authority was stable. That's stage 1. Then, Rome did what governments do when expenses rise and political stability depends on spending. If you want a visual, think of it like this. When a currency is tied to something scarce, like metal, you can't just wave a wand and create more units without cost. But once the state figures out it can shave a little metal off each coin and keep the face value the same, it discovers a magic trick. It can fund itself without asking permission. The problem is that the trick only works while people don't notice. And people eventually notice when the marketplace starts screaming. That's when you see the famous maximum price style decrees. The idea is always the same. Prices are too high, so we'll make them lower by law. But laws don't manufacture wheat. Laws don't create supply. So the result isn't lower prices, it's empty shelves and underground markets. It found ways to stretch the currency. Slowly at first, not enough that the average person could easily detect it. A little less precious metal here, a little more base metal there. The coin looked the same, had the same stamp, felt official. But the value was being diluted. And it didn't happen once. It happened again and again across rulers. That's stage 2 in slow motion. Then the consequences show up. Prices rise. Markets distort. People who produce real goods don't want to exchange them for declining money. The government panics. It starts issuing edicts, controls, threats. And this is where the story gets brutal. When the state tries to force reality to behave, reality doesn't cooperate. What happens instead is scarcity, black markets, hoarding, and the official economy starts to hollow out. That's stage 3. And eventually, the system breaks. Trade collapses. Complex commerce decays. Confidence evaporates. And when confidence dies, the money becomes just decorated metal. Stage 4. Now here's what matters for you. The average person in Rome didn't think they were living through the pattern. They thought they were living through temporary problems, a bad harvest, a rough political season, a few corrupt officials. And that's exactly how it always looks when you're inside it. Which brings us to Weimar Germany. Because if you want the cleanest, most violent example of what stage 3 turning into stage 4 can look like, it's right there. Germany had industry, education, engineering, a real economy. But it also had war costs, reparations, and a political class desperate to avoid admitting the math didn't work. So the printing started. At first, it's framed as temporary, emergency measures, a bridge to stability, and people accept it because they want to believe the system can fix itself. Then it accelerates, and here's a detail that matters. Hyperinflation isn't just prices going up. It's a collapse of time preference. People stop thinking in years and start thinking in hours. If the money loses value by the afternoon, you rush to convert it into something, anything, that feels more durable. That's why you see goods disappear first. Not because the country forgot how to produce, but because producers refuse to trade real output for melting paper. When money becomes a hot potato, the economy turns into a sprint. And sprints don't last. They end in exhaustion and breakdown. And once trust cracks, the acceleration becomes its own fuel. Because if you think prices will be higher tomorrow, you spend today. If you think your currency will be worth less next month, you dump it now. And that behavior speeds up the collapse. Workers get paid more often. Businesses reprice constantly. People chase goods because goods feel more stable than money. And then you get the stories that sound insane until you realize they're just math. Wheelbarrows of cash, savings wiped, professionals abandoning careers because the currency makes normal life impossible. That's stage 4. And it didn't just destroy bank accounts. It destroyed social stability. Because when the middle class gets erased, the center of society disappears. Extremism fills the gap. Now jump forward again, Venezuela. This one hits harder because it's modern. It had massive resources, oil reserves that should have made the country rich, and for a while, everything looked fine. Stage 1. Then spending expanded. Promises got made. Dependence on a single revenue stream deepened. Oil prices moved. Revenue dropped. And instead of restructuring, the political response was the same. Print, borrow, control, blame. Stage 2. Then stage 3 arrived with the classic symptoms: price controls, shortages, propaganda, denial. And then stage 4 became unavoidable: hyperinflation that turned paychecks into jokes and savings into smoke. And because it's modern, you can see the human consequences in real time. Hospitals struggle to stock basics. Families break apart as people leave to send money back. A professional class drains out, which makes rebuilding even harder. And the tragedy is that the average citizen didn't cause any of it, yet they paid the bill through destroyed purchasing power. And here's the repeating twist. In every single example, there were people who saw it early. Not because they were psychic, because they understood incentives. They understood the pattern. So they moved out of the collapsing unit and into something else before the crowd did. And when the crowd finally rushed for exits, the exits were crowded, expensive, restricted, or closed. Now, take a breath. Because this is where people usually say, okay, interesting history lesson, but America is different. And I get it, I really do. The United States has the biggest military, huge innovation, global corporations, deep financial markets, and the world has used the dollar as a dominant settlement currency for decades. But notice something. None of those things directly change the arithmetic of debt and currency. They can delay consequences. They can shape how consequences appear. They can export pain for a while, but they don't erase the mechanism. So let's map the stages. Stage 1 for the modern dollar era was the post-World War II system. The dollar was trusted. It was linked to gold for a time. Global trade organized around it, and that stability created decades of growth. Then the link to hard backing was removed, and the system shifted toward pure fiat, money backed primarily by policy and confidence. That was the doorway into stage 2. From there, debt expanded. And if you zoom out, you can actually see the crisis ladder that kept pushing the system deeper into stage 2. The 1980s normalized big deficits. The 2000s normalized large-scale bailouts and emergency money creation. 2008 taught the system that markets could be rescued. 2020 taught the system that money could be created on a scale that used to be unthinkable. And every time a new precedent is set, it becomes the baseline. That's why the debt conversation feels like it's always high, but somehow always manageable. Until it isn't. And not just a little. The scale is hard to grasp because humans aren't built to intuit trillions. But what you can grasp is direction and speed. Borrowing became normal. Deficits became permanent. Crisis after crisis justified bigger interventions. And each time the system was stressed, the political reward went to whoever promised relief now, not whoever demanded sacrifice for later. That's not a moral statement. That's incentives. Now, for decades, the U.S. had a unique advantage. It could export a lot of its inflationary pressure. Because other nations needed dollars for trade settlement, reserves, and energy transactions. So the U.S. could expand supply, and the world absorbed it. That's why the consequences felt muted for so long. But that advantage comes with a trap. When confidence shifts and the world needs fewer dollars, the dollars don't vanish. They come home. And that's one of the scariest accelerants toward stage 4. One of the clearest giveaways that you're deep in stage 3 is when interest itself becomes a political crisis. When rates rise, government interest costs rise. When interest costs rise, deficits grow. When deficits grow, borrowing grows. And when borrowing grows, someone has to absorb the new debt. If normal buyers demand high yields, the pressure shifts back to the central bank to, quote, stabilize markets. That's how you end up with policies that look like fighting inflation on one day and rescuing the bond market on the next. It's a tug of war between two fires. Now, let me answer a question I've been getting a lot from viewers because it's fair and it's important. People ask, if this is real, why does the stock market still look okay? Why aren't we already in collapse? Great question, and here's the uncomfortable answer. Stage 3 can be a liar. In Stage 3, asset prices can rise even as society gets squeezed because assets are repricing in the weaker currency unit. So a market index can be up while the cost of living is also up, and the real purchasing power of the average household is down. That's why people feel whiplash. The charts say we're fine, but my life says we're not. Stage 3 can also create bursts of optimism, relief rallies, whenever people believe the authorities have things under control. Those bursts can last months, sometimes longer. But the underlying dynamic doesn't disappear. It just loads more pressure into the system. So if you're waiting for the market to warn you cleanly, it may not. Markets often confuse people right before the big shift. Now, I want you to think about your own situation for a second. What is most of the average household's wealth sitting in? For many people, it's not in productive assets. It's in dollar-denominated promises, savings accounts, fixed income instruments, pensions with fixed payouts, bonds, cash value contracts, retirement balances that assume stable purchasing power. And yes, stocks and real estate can help some people. But even there, you have to look at the structure. Are you leveraged, dependent on rates, exposed to job risk, trapped in illiquid assets? And when I say lose everything, I'm not only talking about a dramatic overnight wipeout. Sometimes the loss is death by 1,000 cuts. A retirement account that holds its number but loses half its lifestyle. A pension that arrives on time but buys less every year. A savings account that pays 1% while real costs climb 6, 8, 10%, whatever your lived experience is. And then, at the worst possible time, the system can layer on shocks, layoffs, rate spikes, bank restrictions, emergency measures. That combination is what turns erosion into destruction. Think of exposure in 3 buckets. Bucket 1, households mostly in cash, CDs, money markets, and low-yield, safe products. Bucket 2, households relying on fixed promises, pensions, annuities, long-dated bonds, or government benefits with shaky real purchasing power. Bucket 3, households that are leveraged and fragile, high debt, low savings, incomes that can't handle interruptions. When Stage 4 comes, each bucket gets hit differently, but all 3 get hit. And that's why the number is so large. It's not about intelligence, it's about positioning. And here's why the 127 million number matters in the narrative. It's a way to describe how many households are positioned in a way that gets punished when currency purchasing power erodes or when credit systems seize up. Because in Stage 4, it's not just that numbers change, it's that life plans break. The retirement you thought you had becomes a fraction of what you expected. The safe yield doesn't keep up with the real cost of living. The monthly payment that used to cover groceries covers half a cart. And the people who took risks at the right time, hard assets, productive cash flow, end up on the other side owning more. Now, let me hit you with a reality check that most people don't like. Governments have 3 main ways out of a debt trap. They can raise taxes dramatically. They can cut spending dramatically. Or they can devalue the currency so the debt gets paid back in cheaper units. And out of those 3, the third option is the one that happens most often because it feels the least painful at first. It spreads pain out. It confuses people. It lets politicians say they paid the debt while your purchasing power quietly gets shaved down. Now, I'm not telling you tomorrow morning you'll wake up to wheelbarrows of cash. Timing is always the part nobody can pin down with precision. But direction and incentives, those are visible. And here's a cliffhanger you need to take seriously. Once Stage 3 becomes obvious to the crowd's reaction makes it accelerate. That's why preparation happens earlier. Because the best time to buy a life jacket is before the ship tilts. Now, just before we keep going, I want to slip in something creative and useful. If you're the kind of person who wants to hear silver-related success stories, real stories of people who stacked smart, invested patiently, and turned small moves into big outcomes, there's a link in the description to another channel that's built around exactly that. Go check it out, and if you like that kind of content, subscribe over there too. It's a solid complement to what we do here. All right, back to the main thread. So what does Stage 3 look like in real time? It looks like a central bank trapped between inflation and financial stability. It looks like rate hikes that break something, then pauses, then cuts. It looks like headlines telling you inflation is cooling, while your grocery bill still feels higher than it did 2 years ago. It looks like governments redefining metrics. It looks like new programs, new subsidies, new spending packages, often sold as solutions to the problem that spending helped create. It also looks like a silent shift in global behavior. Alternative settlement arrangements, bilateral trade in other currencies, central banks increasing gold reserves, private capital flowing into hard assets and energy and commodities. Not because everyone is evil, because everyone is responding to incentives. Now, let's deal with the myths, because these myths are what keep people asleep through stage 2 and stage 3. Myth 1. It can't happen here. It can happen anywhere. It has happened everywhere. The pattern doesn't ask permission. Myth 2. The reserve currency status protects us forever. Reserve status can delay consequences, but it also makes the eventual repricing more violent because the scale is larger. Myth 3. Technology will override monetary reality. Technology creates value, but it doesn't prevent a unit of account from being diluted. You can build the most advanced society on Earth and still wreck your currency if you print faster than productivity grows. Now, I want to shift from fear into strategy, because panic is useless. The goal is not to doom scroll economics and feel helpless. The goal is to see the pattern clearly enough to make intelligent moves. So what do people historically do to get on the right side of the transfer? Now, I have to be careful here because people love turning a framework into a shopping list. So let me keep it practical. You still need liquidity. You still need to pay bills. You still need an emergency buffer. The goal is not to go all in on one thing. The goal is to avoid being all in on the one thing that can be printed. If you carry high-interest consumer debt, that's a silent leak in any environment. If you have no cushion, you're forced to sell assets at the worst time. If you have one income stream and it's fragile, you're exposed even if you picked the right asset. So resilience is layered. Some liquidity, some inflation-resistant exposure, some real asset exposure, and some skill and income diversification. That's how people survive messy decades. First, they stop treating cash as safety. Cash is useful for liquidity, yes, but in an environment where purchasing power can erode, cash is not the end goal. It's the temporary tool. Second, they diversify into assets that can't be created by decree. Hard assets, real productive assets, things with scarcity. Third, they reduce exposure to long-dated promises that depend on stable currency value decades from now. And fourth, they increase personal resilience, skills, income streams, networks, community. Because the people who can create real value don't have to beg the currency system for permission to survive. Now, I can already hear someone saying, so what? Buy gold, buy silver, buy land, buy Bitcoin, buy everything? No. The point isn't to blindly copy someone else's portfolio. The point is to understand categories. Promises versus assets. Claims versus control. Paper wealth versus real wealth. And the biggest mistake people make is waiting for certainty. Certainty usually arrives after the window closes. Now here's another cliffhanger. And here's what I'm watching for as tells that the system is moving from late stage 3 into early stage 4. 1. The return of emergency language. Temporary measures, special facilities, stability programs that quietly expand the backstops again. 2. Bigger gaps between official inflation narratives and lived experience. Because once people stop trusting the numbers, they stop trusting the institutions that publish them. 3. Any meaningful move toward limiting exits, whether that's friction in banking, surprise rule changes, or policies that encourage people to keep money trapped in certain products. I'm not saying panic at every rumor. I'm saying pay attention to incentives, because incentives write policy. If we are truly in late stage 3, there's a moment that tends to show up right before the public realizes what's happening. And that moment is when authorities try to restore confidence with policies that actually reveal how fragile confidence has become. New controls, new restrictions, new temporary measures, maybe on banking, maybe on movement of capital, maybe on what you can buy and how much. I'm not saying which one will show up first. I'm saying history loves this move because it's what governments do when they feel control slipping. So the question becomes, are you watching for that moment, or are you waiting to be surprised by it? Now, let's bring this back to you, because that's what matters. If you're watching this, you're probably not the billionaire class. You're not sitting on private jets and offshore structures. You're likely a normal person trying to protect your family, your future, and the years of work you've already put in. So here are the exposure points that hit regular households the hardest. If most of your wealth is in cash or low-yield fixed instruments, inflation is a silent tax. If you depend on a pension that can't adjust meaningfully to real-world costs, you're exposed. If your retirement assumptions require a certain purchasing power, you're exposed. If your income doesn't rise with prices, you're exposed. And if your plan is, I'll just work longer, remember, Stage 4 doesn't politely wait until you're ready. Now, I'm going to make this interactive because I want to know where you're at. Drop a comment with your biggest financial concern right now. Is it inflation, job security, housing, debt, or retirement? And second question, what's one practical move you've made in the last year to strengthen your position? Even if it's small. Because those responses help other viewers get ideas. And again, if you're successful, share that success. It genuinely lifts morale in a time where people feel like the ground is shifting. Now, let's talk about the aggressive part of this message. Because sometimes a soft warning doesn't cut through the noise. If the system keeps leaning on currency dilution, then doing nothing is an active choice. It's choosing to be the passive bag holder of a depreciating unit. And that's not an insult. That's a wake-up call. The system rewards awareness and punishes complacency. And it's not personal. It's mechanical. Now, I want to address one more misconception that traps people. People think wealth transfer means the rich take from the poor. Sometimes, yes. But more often it's simpler. The informed take from the uninformed, because the uninformed stay in the collapsing unit. The informed rotate into assets that reprice upward as the currency reprices downward. So the transfer isn't a villain twirling a mustache, it's a crowd sleeping through stage 2 and then stampeding at stage 4. That's why I keep saying, you don't have to predict the exact date, you have to recognize the direction. Now, another quick reminder, because I get messages about this constantly, check the description. There are bonus links there, including the premium WhatsApp channel link and the membership link. And yes, we're also offering members-only videos. We've got a separate team working on those, doing deeper research, tighter breakdowns, and more frequent updates that we keep exclusively for premium members. If you want the higher detail version of this content, that's where it lives. And by the way, if you want those tells and indicators tracked more regularly, that's exactly what we're building inside the members-only content. The team pulls data, cross-checks narratives, and turns it into clear, actionable context for premium members. It's not hype, it's just signal over noise. Okay, let's land the plane with the most important point. The pattern ends the same way because human incentives end the same way. When debt becomes too big, the temptation is always to dilute. When dilution runs too far, confidence breaks. When confidence breaks, money stops being money. And when money stops being money, society has to reprice everything. That repricing is what people experience as collapse. But inside that repricing is a transfer. And your job is to decide which side you're on before the crowd decides for you. So here's my challenge to you. Take 30 minutes this week and audit your exposure. Not with panic, with honesty. How much of your financial life is built on promises that require stable purchasing power? How much is in assets you actually control? How much flexibility do you have if the cost of living rises faster than your income? And what is one step you can take this month to shift even 5% of your position toward resilience? Because small moves compound. And in a world where the system can shift quickly, small moves made early are often the difference between stability and chaos. One last thing. Don't underestimate how much your story matters. If you've navigated inflation, built a side income, paid off debt, or made a smart move into real assets, say it below. Your comment might be the nudge someone else needs to take action this week. Let's learn from each other. And yes, I read the ones on air. Now, if this video made you think differently, if it gave you a framework instead of just fear, then do two things. First, subscribe. Help us hit that 50K goal in the next 30 days. Second, share this with one person who needs it, because most people won't look at this stuff until it's on the front page, and by then, the easy moves are gone. And I'll leave you with this. Stage 3 is the loudest stage because it's when everyone argues, but stage 4 is the fastest stage because it's when confidence snaps. Don't wait for the snap. Get positioned before the sound, and I'll see you in the next video.